I am a huge booster of historic preservation. If I wasn't, Michelle would get on me because she used to actually used into Chicago, used to be on the historic, on the Landmark Commission there. And we live in a landmark district in Chicago. So this is something that we care deeply about. I guess I'd broaden the point to say that not only should we be thinking about historic preservation, but we should also be thinking about our national parks, our national forests. You know, there's this treasure that we inherited from the previous generation, dating back to, Teddy Roosevelt. And, that requires us to continually renew that commitment to our historic structures and our natural resource base, so that when Trevor and I'll and Olivia and those guys have their kids, when you guys have your grandkids, that stuff is there for them too. So we have actually tried to ramp up our commitment to these issues. Where we can, put a little bit more money into it, but a lot of it's not just more money, it's also more planning. And the Recovery Act gave a range of grants to state and local governments, in some cases around preservation issues. Now, one other point I want to make, though, and you were mentioning how renovation oftentimes will actually generate more jobs than new construction. A related idea is what we can do to make our existing buildings and housing stock more energy efficient. Because it turns out that we could probably cut about 1/3 of our total energy use just on efficiency. We wouldn't need new technologies. We wouldn't need to invent some fancy new fusion energy or anything. If we just took our existing building stock and homes and insulated them, had new windows, schools, hospitals, a lot of big institutions, we could squeeze huge efficiencies out of that. There's a lot of waste to be had, and that would benefit everybody. It would mean that over time we were helping to save the planet by reducing our carbon footprint. People would be paying less on their electricity bills and their heating bills and their air conditioning bills, so it helps consumers. The problem, the reason we haven't done more of this is because it requires some capital on the front end. I mean, a lot of school districts, for example, would love to retrofit their schools, but they're having problems just keeping teachers on payroll right now, so they always put off those investments. And one of the things that we try to do through the Recovery Act, and something that I know that Jerry and Jim have been interested in, is something called Homestar that we've been working on, is to essentially provide families as well as small businesses as well as institutions like schools or hospitals grants up front where we say, all right, we're going to give you $10,000 to retrofit your building or your house, and then you're going to pay us back through your savings on utilities over a 5-year period, for example. So that over time, it doesn't cost taxpayers a lot of money, but we're essentially giving some money up front that's going to then be recouped. And I think there are a lot of ideas that we can pursue on that front that could really make a difference and put a lot of people back to work, whether they're the folks selling the insulation at Home Depot or the small contractor that for a long time was remodeling kitchens or putting in home additions. Maybe that business has dried up. This would be a new area for them to get put to work. And about 1 out of 4 construction, 1 out of 4 jobs that have been lost during this recession are related to the construction industry in some fashion. Those folks have been hit harder than just about anybody else. This would be an important boost for them.
Add to that just one thing, which is it's really not necessary to replace the windows to get that energy efficiency. Didn't somebody write about the caulking gun?
Caulking is
It's a lot less expensive.
absolutely cash for caulkers. Good point. All right, gentleman right there.
Mr. President, my name is Mark Murphy. I'm a neighbor of John and Nicole. Welcome to our neighborhood.
Thank you. It's
Thank
a
you for
beautiful
coming.
neighborhood.
And before I say anything more, we'd be remiss, and my children would be not letting me back home if I didn't say hi to you.
What are their
for
names?
Andrew, Tim, and Ellie, and my beautiful wife, Shannon.
Tell everybody I said hi.
Thank you. Now, the question I have for you is, I'm a union side labor attorney in D.C., and I know you have some background in that. And your comments here today, and both your Labor Day comments, struck me and my colleagues about the shrinking middle class and the jobs that were lost, and how you're going to, and your administration is going to, replace those jobs. I work every day with working class, blue collar workers that deal with a lot of different issues. One of the issues that is dear to my heart, and I know a lot of my colleagues and union members, is the Employee Free Choice Act. And for people who don't know about that, it's just basically an act, a law that would make it easier to unionize. And it's proven that unionized employees get better wages and better benefits. And unfortunately, that act hasn't been passed yet, and I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Well,
thank you.
A little bit of background for those who aren't as familiar with it. The Employee Free Choice Act is in response to 20, 30 years where it's become more and more difficult for unions to just get a fair election and have their employers actually negotiate with them. I mean, the laws that have been on the books have gotten more and more difficult to apply. A lot of times, companies who may be good employers but just don't want the bother of having a union will work very hard to make sure a union doesn't develop. And they will drag out the process for a very long time, and in some cases, workers who are joining unions or want to join a union or helping to organize one may get intimidated. And so the idea behind the Employee Free Choice Act is, let's just make the playing field even. We don't have to force anybody to be in a union, but if they want to join a union, let's make it a little easier for them to go ahead and sign up. Now, the short answer to your question is, we are supportive of this. Frankly, we don't have 60 votes in the Senate. So, the opportunity to actually get this passed right now is not real high. What we've done instead is try to do as much as we can administratively to make sure that it's easier for unions to operate and that they're not being placed at an unfair disadvantage. Let me speak more broadly, though, about the issue, the point that you just made. So many things we take for granted came about because of the union movement. Minimum wage, 40-hour work week, child labor laws, you name it, weekends. Yeah, a lot of these things came about because people were fighting for them. They didn't come about automatically and naturally. The other thing that unions did, particularly in the manufacturing sector, was it gave a base for blue-collar workers to get a middle-class wage, which meant that essentially the guys working at the Ford plant could afford to buy a Ford. And so it increased demand overall, and ironically, it meant that businesses had more customers and could make more money. Now, we now live in an era of international competition, and that makes it harder for businesses. I mean, I think we should acknowledge that the business environment now is much more competitive than it was back in the 1960s or 70s. Technology has made it more difficult for businesses to compete. Transportation has made it more difficult to compete. The costs for shipping big manufactured goods from China to the United States, or high volumes of goods from Japan or Korea or Malaysia or Indonesia to the United States, is a lot cheaper now than it was. So what that means is we've got to be sympathetic to business concerns that they don't get priced out of the market if they're competing internationally. And I think the best way to balance that is to make sure that business interests here in the United States and labor interests, workers' interests here in the United States are aligned. Make sure that businesses are looking after their workers and giving them a good deal. But workers and unions also have to think about businesses and not put them in a position where they're potentially priced out of the marketplace. Now, I think that that balance is tilted way too far against unions these days. And I think that actually if we had some of these businesses with employees who were there for a longer term, were more loyal, they weren't worried about their jobs being shipped overseas, that would actually be good for the economy as a whole and would be good for businesses here as a whole. But we have to acknowledge that competition means that businesses and workers here in the United States have to be better trained, better skilled, more competitive, leaner, meaner, and we've got to invent more stuff so that we constantly are working on high-end jobs as opposed to the low-end jobs, because the truth is the low-end jobs, we're never going to be able to compete on the basis of price. I mean, there's always going to be a country, actually wages are starting to go up a little bit in China. Our problem is not China. The next is going to be Vietnam, or it's going to be Bangladesh, or there's always going to be some place in the world where they pay lower wages. Our advantage is going to be if we have higher skills, we have a workforce that works together more effectively, that our businesses are better organized. If we have that, then I think that we can compete against anybody. And a good example is actually Germany, which has a much higher rate of unionization than we do, but they've actually been able to continue to export at very high levels and compete all around the world, mainly because they've got such a highly skilled workforce. They're putting together high-end products that can compete with anybody. Yeah, right here. Mike's coming.
Hi, Mr. President. It's an honor. I'm so nervous.
Don't be nervous.
Oh, I am so nervous. I love everything you're doing. I love your vision. I'm so glad you got into office. I love medical health care reform. Where I come from, where when we had to go to the doctor, we went to the doctor.
Right.
If we needed surgery, we got surgery. And then I came here and found out, oh my gosh, you need insurance, you need this, you need that, which I could never afford on the salary I make now. I'm very lucky. My husband, unfortunately, he's in the construction business, but hopefully that's going to come back.
Right.
So my question is also, I work for Fairfax County Public Schools, and I haven't had a raise in 2 years, and I may not even have a job next year, because I hear it's going to get worse before it's going to get better. Do you agree with that? Like, I mean, I know we're starting to improve and jobs are starting to come back, but how long do you think this is going to take? It sounds wonderful.
Well, first of all, you have a better chance of keeping your job in the public school systems now because Jerry and Jim voted to close a pretty egregious tax loophole that was incentivizing jobs going overseas, and that even some corporations that stood to benefit thought was ridiculous. They closed that loophole in order to fund teacher jobs and police officer jobs and firefighter jobs all across the country. So that's been very helpful in providing assistance to school districts that are strapped. The economy is improving, but one of the headwinds that the economy is experiencing is actually that state and local governments have been getting really hard hit. Now, we gave states a lot of help at the beginning of this crisis because their budgets were just imploding. And typically state and local governments, they get hit faster by declines in tax revenues and property tax. Obviously, they rely on property taxes, and with the housing market collapsing, that was really hitting them hard. And so they were looking at possibly, slashing 30% of jobs in school districts or in social services. And one of the most effective ways of preventing this from tipping over into a Great Depression was